The storm rolled into Portland without warning, like grief arriving on a Tuesday morning. Thick sheets of rain hammered the windows of Rose City Cafe like bullets from an angry sky, each drop carrying winter's fury. Inside, where morning conversations usually hummed over freshly brewed coffee, only one man sat alone with a plate he could barely afford. Marcus Thompson, a decorated Navy veteran with tired eyes and hands calloused from years of night shifts, had finally saved enough for a real breakfast after 3 weeks of surviving on instant ramen and determination. The eggs were still warm, the bacon crisp, the toast golden brown. It was supposed to be his victory meal, a small celebration before the custody hearing that could change everything. But before he could lift the first bite to his lips, the diner doors crashed open with violence that made every patron turn. Dylan Chen stumbled in like a ghost driven by the wind, a broken figure silhouetted against the storm, soaking wet and trembling. His dark hair was plastered against pale cheeks that looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. His expensive camera bag clung to his shoulder as if it contained his last breath, the only possession he'd managed to protect from whatever hell he'd escaped. The young photographer's eyes darted around with wild panic of someone being hunted, someone who'd learned that safety was an illusion. When the waitress, a kind woman with worry lines etched around her eyes, asked what he needed, Dylan's voice cracked like broken glass against concrete. "Help," he whispered, the words so faint it was almost swallowed by rain against the windows. "Please, if you believe in the power of kindness to change lives and that one moment of compassion can spark extraordinary transformation, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Heart Stories." Your support helps us bring more life-changing stories that remind us love always wins, even in the darkest storms. Marcus did not know why he stood up. Maybe it was military instinct, the same impulse that had carried him through 3 deployments and countless moments when someone needed help. Maybe it was the desperate recognition he saw reflected in Dylan's hollow stare, the same look Marcus had worn in his own mirror during the darkest days after his discharge. Or maybe it was the memory of his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, who once said with the wisdom that only children possess, "Daddy, helping someone is like giving them your sunshine when they're lost in darkness." And sunshine doesn't cost anything to share. Whatever force drove him, Marcus walked toward the stranger with his warm breakfast still untouched on the table. "Here," he said gently, his voice carrying quiet authority of someone who understood both command and compassion, sliding the plate across the worn Formica surface. "You need this more than I do." Dylan's hands shook as he reached for the food, tremors running through his fingers like earthquake aftershocks. He wasn't just hungry, Marcus realized as he watched. He was heartbroken, terrified, running from something that had stripped away everything except the camera he protected with desperate intensity, as if it contained evidence of crimes that powerful people would kill to keep hidden. Marcus watched Dylan devour the eggs and toast with fierce desperation of someone who hadn't eaten in days, tears mixing with raindrops that still clung to his face like liquid diamonds. Marcus sat across from him in the booth, not eating, not speaking, simply making sure this broken soul wouldn't collapse on the cracked vinyl seats. Dylan whispered his name when he finally looked up, but offered nothing more. Not where he'd come from, not what had happened, not why he looked like someone fleeing for his very life. But Marcus understood silence after trauma. He'd lived in it himself when Sophie's mother died, leaving him drowning in responsibilities and grief he wasn't prepared for. Dylan finished eating but didn't leave. He stared at the empty plate as if afraid that moving would shatter whatever fragile safety he'd found in this corner booth. The storm outside had begun to calm, but his breathing remained shallow and uneven. Marcus called Sophie's school to say he'd be late for pickup, then offered Dylan his worn denim jacket. Over the next hour, the 2 men sat in the quiet hum of the diner. Dylan slowly began to thaw, his rigid posture easing degree by degree, though fear still flickered behind his dark eyes. He told Marcus, in fragments and whispers, that he had no money, no phone, no belongings except the small digital camera he clutched against his chest like salvation itself. When Marcus gently suggested he could drive Dylan somewhere safe, Dylan's entire body went rigid. He shook his head violently, panic flashing across his features. He didn't explain, couldn't explain, and Marcus had the wisdom not to push. Instead, he quietly slid his remaining pocket change across the table, even though it meant he'd be skipping dinner tonight. That's when their stories began to unfold like pages torn from a book neither wanted to read. Dylan's voice was barely audible as he shared fragments of the nightmare that had brought him to this moment. He was a documentary photographer, someone who had dedicated his life to capturing truth through his camera lens. But truth, he'd learned too late, had made him incredibly dangerous to incredibly powerful people. He'd been investigating corruption that reached into the highest levels of corporate and political power, documenting systematic targeting of marginalized communities. The assault had come without warning, a message wrapped in violence. Marcus recognized something familiar in Dylan's hollow stare, something that made his chest tighten with uncomfortable recognition. It was the same look he'd worn in his own bathroom mirror after being discharged from the Navy under "Don't ask, don't tell," the shame that came from being punished for the crime of existing authentically in a world that demanded you hide fundamental parts of yourself. Marcus's own story began to spill out in return, words he'd kept locked away for months suddenly pouring forth. How he'd served his country with honor and distinction, earning commendations and respect, only to be thrown away like garbage when someone discovered he was gay. How his ex-husband Brad had initially supported him through the trauma of losing his military career, but had grown cold when Marcus developed PTSD. How Brad was now using every legal weapon to paint Marcus as an unfit father. The custody hearing was in just 3 days. Marcus confessed, his voice breaking slightly. He'd been working double shifts, pulling night security at a warehouse and morning shifts as a barista, just to scrape together enough money to afford even a basic legal defense. But Brad had resources Marcus could never match: money, family connections, and now a legal team determined to prove that a gay veteran struggling with PTSD couldn't possibly provide the stability a child needed. Dylan listened with intense focus of someone who understood systemic oppression from the inside out. He mentioned his own work documenting LGBTQ military discrimination cases, how he'd interviewed dozens of service members whose stories echoed Marcus's own. As they talked, Rosa, the diner's owner, refilled their coffee cups without being asked. She mentioned the upcoming city council vote on the trans rights ordinance, scheduled for the same week as Marcus's custody hearing. Portland was fighting to protect its LGBTQ community with concrete legal protections, but powerful forces were pushing back. When Dylan finally stood to leave, the rain having softened to a gentle mist, he pressed something into Marcus's palm, a business card for the Chen Foundation Legal Defense Fund. "For people like us," he said quietly. "When the system tries to crush you for being who you are, sometimes you need allies who know the terrain." Marcus watched Dylan disappear into the Portland drizzle, but something fundamental had shifted during their time in that booth. Neither of them was alone anymore in their fight against a world that seemed determined to erase them. And sometimes that recognition is the first step toward changing everything. 2 weeks passed like slow torture. Marcus's preliminary custody hearing had gone worse than his darkest nightmares. Brad's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit, had methodically dissected every aspect of Marcus's life with surgical precision. His PTSD medication became evidence of mental instability. His night security job, proof of unreliable income. Even his volunteer work with homeless veterans was twisted into a narrative about someone who couldn't maintain healthy boundaries with unstable people. The judge's words still echoed in Marcus's mind like a death sentence. Serious concerns about the petitioner's ability to provide consistent emotional and financial stability for a minor child. The final hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. 3 days away, Marcus was behind on rent, eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches. And Sophie was staying with Mrs. Chen next door because he couldn't afford childcare during his court appearances. His 8-year-old daughter's eyes had grown too wise, too worried, asking questions he couldn't answer about why Daddy looked so sad all the time. The legal fees had drained every penny of his savings, and he was borrowing money just to keep the lights on. Then the letter arrived on a gray Thursday morning. The envelope was heavy cream paper with embossed lettering that belonged in movies about wealthy families making life-changing decisions. Marcus stared at the return address with growing dread. Chen and Associates, Pearl District, Portland. He recognized the name from the business card Dylan had pressed into his palm weeks ago, but seeing it on official legal correspondence made his stomach drop like a stone. Lawyers didn't send letters to struggling single fathers without reason. And in Marcus's experience, those reasons were rarely good ones. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers, expecting debt collection threats or worse. Instead, he found a formal but oddly gentle request for his presence at the law firm for a matter described only as urgent and of personal importance regarding Mr. Dylan Chen. Dylan, the broken photographer from the diner, the man who'd vanished into Portland's rain like a ghost seeking shelter from demons only he could see. Marcus read the letter 3 times, each pass deepening his confusion and mounting sense of dread. Why would attorneys be involved in whatever had happened to Dylan? Had something terrible occurred? Was Marcus somehow the last person to have seen him alive? His breath quickened as darker possibilities crowded his mind. Maybe Dylan had been found dead, and Marcus was being called to testify about their encounter. Maybe the people who'd been hunting Dylan had discovered that Marcus had helped him, making him a target in whatever dangerous game Dylan had been playing. Maybe this was all connected somehow to his custody battle, another weapon Brad's legal team could use against him. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, a sense of responsibility, of unfinished business. Whatever had happened to Dylan, Marcus needed to know. The man had appeared in his life during one of his darkest moments, and despite their brief encounter, Marcus felt connected to him in ways he couldn't fully explain. The next morning, after dropping Sophie at school with yet another promise that everything would work out fine, Marcus took 3 buses across Portland to reach a towering glass building in the Pearl District that seemed to swallow daylight whole. The structure rose from the sidewalk like a monument to power and wealth, its reflective surfaces offering no hint of the human dramas playing out inside. The lobby was all marble floors and chrome fixtures, populated by people in suits that cost more than Marcus made in 6 months. He stood there in his cleanest jeans and a jacket with fraying sleeves, his hands rough and scarred from years of manual labor, feeling painfully out of place among Portland's legal and financial elite. A polished assistant with kind eyes led him through a maze of corridors to a conference room overlooking the Willamette River. Marcus clenched his fists to stop his hands from shaking as he took in the view through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawled below him, unaware that his entire world might be about to shift on its axis once again. When the door opened and 2 attorneys entered, Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. They placed a thick manila folder on the mahogany conference table, their expressions carefully neutral but carrying an undercurrent of something that looked almost like anticipation. "Mr. Thompson," the older attorney began, his voice measured and precise. "We represent Mr. Dylan Chen." Marcus felt his military posture automatically straighten as he prepared for impact. "Is he safe?" The words escaped before he could stop them, carrying all the worry he'd been carrying since that rainy morning weeks ago. The attorney's expression softened slightly, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine warmth underneath. "He is safe now, thanks largely to you." Relief crashed through Marcus so suddenly he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. "But we need to discuss why you're here." The attorneys opened the manila folder with deliberate care, revealing documents that made Marcus's understanding of reality tilt sideways. Glossy photographs showed Dylan at art gallery openings, smiling confidently in expensive clothing. Newspaper clippings featured headlines about the Chen Foundation's latest philanthropic initiatives. Financial records revealed assets in the tens of millions. This wasn't the broken, terrified man Marcus had found shivering in a diner booth. But then came the revelation that would change everything Marcus thought he understood about his own life. Dylan's investigation had exposed something far more sinister than simple corporate corruption. Through months of dangerous undercover work, he'd uncovered a coordinated network led by Whitfield Industries, a massive conglomerate that had been systematically funding anti-LGBTQ legislation across multiple states. Their strategy was chillingly methodical. Identify prominent LGBTQ individuals in various communities, destroy their credibility through legal and social persecution, then use those victories to establish precedents that could strip rights from entire populations. Brad hadn't stumbled upon his legal team by accident. The attorneys explained with grim precision. Whitfield Industries had specifically approached him 6 months ago, offering unlimited financial backing to turn Marcus's custody case into a test case for their broader agenda. Their goal was devastatingly simple: establish legal precedent in family court that gay veterans suffering from PTSD were inherently unfit parents. If they could destroy Marcus publicly and completely, they could use that victory as a template to attack thousands of other LGBTQ families across the country. Dylan's camera contained irrefutable evidence of the entire conspiracy: bank transfer records showing payments to Brad's legal team, recorded conversations between Whitfield executives discussing strategy, internal documents outlining their systematic approach to targeting vulnerable LGBTQ parents. Everything needed to expose a network that reached into state legislatures, family courts, and corporate boardrooms. But using that evidence meant making a choice that terrified Marcus to his core. The attorneys explained that Dylan was currently in protective custody, his trauma from the assault too severe for him to appear in court or give public testimony. The legal team needed Marcus's firsthand account of Dylan's condition when he disappeared, and more critically, they needed his explicit consent to use the evidence that could save his custody case. The catch was brutal in its simplicity. Using Dylan's evidence meant becoming the public face of the fight against Whitfield Industries. It meant media attention, death threats, and making Sophie a target in a war much larger than their family. It meant stepping out of the shadows and declaring himself willing to fight a battle that could destroy them both. The Chen Foundation was offering more than just legal support, the younger attorney explained. They wanted to provide full financial backing for Marcus's custody case, protection services for him and Sophie, housing assistance to get them out of their dangerous neighborhood, and a permanent position as the foundation's director of veteran advocacy. They'd researched Marcus's military service, his work with homeless veterans, his quiet leadership in Portland's LGBTQ community. They wanted him to help other veterans facing similar systematic persecution. But Marcus struggled with accepting help that felt overwhelming in its scope. His military pride warred with his desperate need, leaving him torn between gratitude and suspicion. Was this genuine partnership or elaborate charity? Could he trust people whose wealth was beyond his comprehension? What if this was just another form of being used, dressed up in prettier language? The younger attorney slid a handwritten note across the polished table. Dylan's handwriting was shaky, barely legible, but the message was clear. You saved my life when I had absolutely nothing left to give the world. You didn't ask who I was or what I could offer in return. You just saw another human being who needed help, and you acted without hesitation. Now please let me return that gift. Let me help you save Sophie. Marcus stared at the note until the words blurred through unshed tears. He thought about Sophie asking why Daddy looked so sad all the time. He thought about the judge's dismissive tone when discussing his fitness as a parent. He thought about Brad's smug certainty that money and connections would always triumph over love and dedication. But mostly he thought about Dylan, broken and shivering in that diner booth, and how sometimes survival meant accepting that you couldn't fight alone against systems designed to crush people like them. Marcus looked up at the attorneys, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to agree to. I want to meet Dylan first. I need to know this is truly what he wants, not just what his lawyers think is strategically sound. And if we do this, I want to contribute something real to this foundation, not just serve as a poster child for your cause. The attorneys exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes. Dylan specifically requested that conversation before we proceeded with anything. One replied, "And Mr. Thompson, this has never been about charity. This is about building something permanent that ensures no family will ever face what you and Dylan have endured. Sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest choice you can make." 6 months later, The same diner booth where two broken men had first found each other now held an entirely different energy. Marcus sat across from Dylan, both of them transformed by the journey they'd survived together, their faces carrying the quiet strength that comes from having fought impossible battles and won. Steam rose from their coffee cups as Portland's autumn rain painted gentle patterns on the windows. No longer the violent storm that had brought them together, but a soft benediction on what they'd built. Marcus had won full custody of Sophie after Brad's financial backing was exposed as part of the Whitfield conspiracy. The legal victory had felt hollow at first, overshadowed by the magnitude of what they'd uncovered. But watching Sophie blossom in their new life had filled that emptiness with something precious. Brad now faced federal charges for his role in the conspiracy, and Sophie was slowly healing from the trauma of watching her parents wage war in courtrooms and lawyers' offices. Dylan's recovery had been gradual but undeniably real. Months of intensive therapy, PTSD treatment, and the patient rebuilding of trust had brought him back from the edge of an abyss that had nearly claimed him completely. He'd returned to photography with renewed purpose, but now his lens captured something fundamentally different than before. Hope instead of despair, resilience instead of victimhood, LGBTQ families not just surviving systematic discrimination, but thriving in spite of it, building communities that were stronger than the hatred directed at them. Their work with the Chen Foundation had grown beyond either man's wildest expectations, becoming something that felt less like employment and more like calling. Marcus now served as Director of Veteran Advocacy, helping dozens of LGBTQ veterans navigate legal challenges that echoed his own experience. Dylan documented their stories with the eye of someone who understood trauma from the inside, creating a powerful visual narrative of survival, community, and the kind of justice that grows from the ground up rather than being handed down from above. The Portland Trans Rights Ordinance had passed by a wider margin than anyone expected, partly due to their testimony about how corporate-funded hatred specifically targeted families like theirs. Whitfield Industries was facing federal investigation on multiple fronts, and the network they'd exposed was crumbling under sustained legal and media scrutiny. 3 other states had launched similar investigations based on evidence Dylan's camera had captured. Sophie, now 9 years old and wise beyond her years, had become the foundation's unofficial mascot and chief morale officer. She drew pictures for the foundation's waiting room, colorful artwork depicting rainbow families sheltered under protective umbrellas. Her innocence tested by what she'd witnessed but ultimately unbroken. She'd started asking questions about the work Marcus and Dylan did. Questions that suggested she understood more about justice and advocacy than most adults ever would. Marcus watched Dylan review photographs on his camera screen. The same device that had once contained evidence of their persecution, now capturing moments of triumph and transformation. The scholarship program they'd established for LGBTQ single parents was providing educational opportunities for over 50 families across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California, creating ripple effects they were only beginning to understand. Their monthly tradition of meeting in this specific booth had become sacred ritual, not just a way to remember where they'd started, but a deliberate practice of planning where they were going next. Today, they were discussing expansion into the Southwest, where other advocates had reached out for support and guidance. The movement was growing beyond what either man could have imagined during their first desperate encounter. Rosa, the diner's owner, refilled their cups without being asked, her weathered hands moving with the same practiced grace that had welcomed them during their darkest hour. She'd become an integral part of their chosen family, her establishment serving as an unofficial safe haven for others seeking community and connection in a world that often felt hostile to their very existence. Outside, the rain began to slow to a gentle mist that softened the edges of everything it touched. Through the window, Marcus spotted a young transgender veteran walking purposefully toward the diner, clutching one of their foundation's business cards like a lifeline. Another soul finding their way to safety, guided by the network of protection they'd built from their shared trauma. Dylan followed Marcus's gaze and smiled, the expression carrying depths of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with service to something larger than themselves. They'd created something beautiful and lasting from the wreckage of their individual struggles, proving that sometimes the most powerful response to systematic oppression is simply refusing to be destroyed by it. How many times do we walk past someone else's pain without recognizing the opportunity for connection it represents? Marcus and Dylan learned that sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person is simply witnessing their struggle and choosing to stay present with them through it. If this story moved you or reminded you of someone who needs to know they're not alone in their fight for dignity and acceptance, please share it with them. Subscribe to Heart Stories for more journeys of courage, community, and the chosen families we build when love becomes louder than fear. Because every act of kindness creates ripples we may never see, but that always matter.